The Drexery stealth ship descended silently through Earth's atmosphere, its cloaking field shimmering faintly in the moonlight. On board, Drexery officers watched their target through holographic displays, a lone old man walking along a desolate dirt path. He wore a weathered military jacket, its edges frayed and dotted with faint burn marks, and carried a small leather bag slung over his shoulder. His gait was slow, deliberate, like someone in no hurry to reach a destination. The officers sneered. This was the so-called threat? A human so old and unassuming that he appeared ready to crumble under a strong breeze. The Drexery commander, clad in imposing black armor with glowing red accents, clicked his mandibles in derision. This is what your intelligence deemed vital? A frail remnant of their kind? Pathetic. Their intelligence had painted this man as a nobody, an irrelevant figure from Earth's backwater population. He lived in isolation, unarmed and unprotected. Yet, for reasons no Drexery could comprehend, whispers persisted that he might hold the key to humanity's strategic brilliance in the ongoing war. Capture him intact, the commander barked. We'll pry their secrets from him soon enough. The stealth ship deployed a capture beam, locking onto the old man. He paused briefly as the energy surrounded him, then tilted his head skyward, as if he could see the invisible ship hovering above. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He made no effort to resist as the beam lifted him off the ground and into the ship's hold. Inside, Drexery soldiers encircled him, their plasma rifles trained on his every move. But the old man stood there calmly, his hands loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. One soldier prodded him roughly. Move, human! He moved, but only because he chose to. His movements were measured, deliberate. As he walked toward the containment cell, his eyes scanned the alien vessel. The soldiers didn't notice, but the commander did. The human's gaze lingered a fraction too long on key systems, the control panel, the ventilation shafts, the weapon racks along the walls. It wasn't the gaze of a frightened prisoner. It was the gaze of a predator assessing his surroundings. Inside the dimly lit cell, the old man sat down on the cold, metallic bench. The energy field sealing the doorway hummed faintly, casting blue light across his face. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes as though settling into a familiar routine. His calm unnerved the guard stationed nearby. In the command room, the Drexery officers watched his every move on their monitors. He's far too composed, one officer muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Shouldn't he be panicking? Begging? The commander dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. Humans are known for their bravado. It's a mask for their inherent weakness. He'll break soon enough. The Drexery had reason to be arrogant. Across the galaxy, they had subjugated countless species, crushing rebellions with overwhelming force. But their campaign against humanity had not gone as planned. Human forces were elusive, unpredictable, and disturbingly effective. Entire Drexery fleets had been outmaneuvered and destroyed, their commanders humiliated. The Drexery High Council demanded answers, and this man, this insignificant earthling, was supposed to provide them. Begin preparing the interrogation chamber, the commander ordered. I want him broken before the next cycle. But back in his cell, the old man opened his eyes. His fingers absently traced the edge of one of the metals sewn into his jacket, its once bright metal now dulled by time. Scars peeked out from beneath the fabric of his sleeves, each one telling a story that would send shivers through even the most hardened Drexery warrior. A Drexery guard sneered at him through the energy field. Enjoy your last hours, human! Soon you'll be nothing but another example of our superiority. The old man lifted his gaze, his blue eyes sharp and piercing like twin blades. He studied the guard for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice calm and measured, he spoke for the first time since his capture. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The room buzzed with the hum of alien technology, its walls lined with glowing Drexery instruments that seemed to pulse with life. In the center, the old man sat strapped into a sleek interrogation chair, its restraints glowing faintly with energy. Drexery officers encircled him, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the harsh light. The commander loomed closest, his mandibles clicking as he surveyed his prisoner with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "You humans are remarkably stubborn," the commander began, his voice a low growl. "Your kind fights like vermin, scurrying and striking from the shadows. But you're fragile, predictable, weak." The old man said nothing, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to the commander with only passing interest. His gaze drifted across the room, taking in every detail: the layout, the controls, the positioning of the guards. When his eyes settled back on the commander, they carried an almost amused glint. "Strap him tighter," the commander barked, and one of the guards adjusted the restraints, though the human hadn't struggled once. "We know your kind. You'll break eventually." The interrogation began. Pulses of light flickered across the chair as it delivered shocks designed to penetrate nerves and disrupt neural pathways. The old man barely flinched. A holographic projector activated in front of him, displaying Earth cities burning under simulated Drexery bombardments. Voices of humans crying out for mercy echoed through the chamber. "Your people are already losing," the commander sneered. "It's only a matter of time. Tell us where the remnants of your fleet hide, and perhaps we'll grant you a swift end." Still, the old man remained silent. His calm demeanor was beginning to gnaw at the Drexery officers. One of them stepped closer, a younger, eager soldier, and jabbed a claw toward his face. "You think this is bravery? You're just a relic from a doomed species." At that, the old man finally spoke, his voice steady and edged with a quiet authority. "Relic? Perhaps. But relics are often more dangerous than you realize." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but the commander waved them back. He leaned closer, his glowing red eyes narrowing. "Your games won't save you, human. Do you see the technology around you? This chair alone has broken warriors far greater than you." "Warriors?" The old man's lips curled into a faint smile. "I've seen warriors. I've buried warriors. Whatever you think you've faced, it doesn't compare." The commander slammed his clawed hand onto the armrest of the chair. "Enough riddles! Speak, or we'll reduce your planet to ash." The old man's smile widened. "You could try. But the thing about humans, we don't fear monsters. We become them when we have to." For a moment, there was silence. The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on the room. The Drexery commander straightened, his composure slipping ever so slightly. He motioned to the holographic projector, which flickered to display Drexery fleets in formation, their ships vast and bristling with weapons. "Do you see this? The might of the Drexery Empire. Our fleets are unstoppable. We've conquered dozens of worlds. What can your scattered forces possibly do against such power?" The old man chuckled, a deep, gravelly sound that sent an involuntary shiver through the room. "Your formations are predictable. That flagship," he gestured with his chin toward a particularly imposing vessel on the display, "vulnerable on its starboard flank. Overextended supply lines. A poor choice of staging ground." The room grew deathly quiet. The Drexery officers stared at him in shock. How did this human know their fleet's vulnerabilities? The commander's claws flexed involuntarily. "You're bluffing," the commander hissed, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Am I?" the old man replied, his tone calm and unyielding. "You've underestimated humanity from the start. You think we're weak because we bleed. Because we age. But you don't understand what desperation makes of us." The commander's fury boiled over. "Enough! Show him more!" The holographic display shifted again, now depicting Drexery soldiers marching through shattered human colonies. The scenes were meant to intimidate, to crush morale. Instead, the old man laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. "What's so amusing, human?" one of the officers demanded, his voice edged with panic. "You," the old man said simply. "Your pride blinds you. You think showing me your victories will make me cower? All I see are mistakes. Flaws. Do you even realize how many of your successes were traps we let you walk into? No? Of course you don't." The commander's mandibles twitched, his confidence shaken. He slammed his fist onto a nearby console, deactivating the projector. You're stalling. Whatever tricks you think you have, they'll fail. You'll tell us what we want to know, or you'll die. The old man's expression darkened, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You have no idea what I am, do you? You've captured a man you don't understand. And that's going to cost you everything. The commander took a step back, as if suddenly unsure of himself. Take him back to his cell, he ordered. This session is over. As the guards unstrapped him and began to lead him out, the old man cast one last glance at the Drexery commander, his eyes gleaming with quiet menace. When the room was empty, he sat alone in the sterile silence, a faint smile playing on his lips. You still have no idea who I am, he murmured, his voice carrying an edge of certainty that sent a chill through the air. Humanity's darkest days had come without warning. One moment, the skies were quiet. The next, they were ablaze with alien warships. The galactic war wasn't a skirmish or a border conflict, it was annihilation. Entire colonies were wiped out in hours. Humanity, scattered and unprepared, was on the verge of collapse. In those desperate times, the man who would later be known as the Butcher of Soul first emerged. Back then, he was just a young officer named Marcus Harlan, stationed on a failing outpost near Mars. When the Drexery fleet arrived, their ships blotted out the stars, their soldiers raining down in endless waves. Command was in chaos, humanity's forces retreating. Harlan, unshaken, stepped forward. He didn't rally his troops with grand speeches. He didn't offer hope. What he gave them was survival through calculated ruthlessness. When Drexery forces stormed the outpost, Harlan detonated the colony's fusion reactors, sacrificing the base, and most of his own men, to obliterate the enemy's landing force. It was a cold, brutal decision, but it worked. The Drexery fleet was forced to retreat, and Harlan's name began to spread. That victory was just the beginning. As humanity struggled to regroup, Harlan rose quickly through the ranks, not because he sought power but because no one else could do what he did. He was the one willing to make the decisions others couldn't stomach. He was the one who saw war for what it truly was, a game of survival where morality was a luxury. The nickname, the Butcher of Soul, came after his most infamous maneuver. A Drexery armada had blockaded Earth, their ships positioned to strike a final blow. Harlan, now a fleet commander, devised a plan so audacious that even his own officers balked. He ordered his fleet to engage the Drexery head-on, but with a twist. Half his ships carried no weapons. They were decoys stripped down and filled with explosives. As the Drexery closed in, expecting an easy victory, Harlan's decoys detonated, tearing through the heart of their fleet. The survivors were routed by his remaining forces. It was a victory, but at a cost, thousands of human lives sacrificed in the process. To the Drexery, it was a massacre. To humanity, it was salvation. Over the years, Harlan's name became legend. He masterminded ambushes in asteroid fields, turned barren moons into death traps, and crippled entire alien fleets with strategies so unconventional that they bordered on madness. Yet his methods were not without controversy. Many in the human ranks despised him, calling him a monster who saw soldiers as pawns. But to the alien empires, he was a nightmare, unpredictable, merciless, unstoppable. Among those who feared and hated him most were the Drexery. In one of the war's most decisive campaigns, Harlan led an assault deep into Drexery space. Their fleets were annihilated, their homeworld bombarded into submission. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a humiliation. For years, the Drexery had spoken of their superiority, their invincibility. Harlan had shattered that illusion, and the wounds still burned in their pride. It was no coincidence that they hated humanity as much as they did. The war had ended, but their defeat at Harlan's hands festered like an open wound. And yet, in their arrogance, they had overlooked the one man who had brought them to their knees. They had captured him, sneering at his age and apparent frailty, not realizing that they were staring into the eyes of the very man who had once torn through their fleets like a storm. Back in the present, the old man, Marcus Harlan, sat calmly in the interrogation chamber once more. The Drexery commander, still simmering from their previous encounter, paced before him. Enough of your games. You'll tell us what we want to know. Harlan's response was a quiet chuckle, his demeanor as composed as ever. You Drexery never learn, do you? Always barking, always posturing. It's the same arrogance that got your fleets destroyed years ago. The commander froze mid-step, his glowing red eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Sol, Harlan said, his voice low but firm. About the armada you sent to break humanity, the ships you lost, the humiliation you endured. You don't even remember who did that to you, do you? The room grew tense as the Drexery officers exchanged uncertain glances. Harlan leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, his gaze boring into the commander. I'll give you a hint. You're looking at him. It took a moment for the realization to sink in. The officers stiffened, the weight of Harlan's words crashing down on them. The commander took a step back, his confidence faltering. Impossible. You're just an old man? Harlan finished for him. Yes, I've aged. Wars do that. But let me tell you something about age, it doesn't erase the past. It doesn't erase me. The Drexery's bravado was cracking, and Harlan saw it. He pressed on, his voice sharp. Your greatest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was letting me live long enough to fight back. The commander, now visibly shaken, clenched his claws. Guards, take him away! As the guards moved to escort Harlan back to his cell, he smirked. You Drexery never change. Still thinking brute force will solve everything. But don't worry, I'll remind you, just like I did before. Even as they dragged him from the room, his words lingered like a shadow over the Drexery officers. And for the first time, they truly began to understand who they had brought aboard their ship. The Drexery commander stood in the observation deck, gazing out at the void of space. His claws tapped against the control panel, a rhythmic click that betrayed his growing frustration. Despite the confidence he had shown earlier, the old human's calm demeanor and cryptic warnings gnawed at him. The man was too composed, too deliberate. Something was wrong, but he couldn't put his claw on it. In the holding cell, Marcus Harlan sat quietly, his face illuminated by the faint green glow of the force field. He leaned back against the cold wall, his eyes closed, lips moving faintly. To anyone watching, it would seem as though he was muttering nonsense or perhaps succumbing to fatigue. In reality, he was counting down, waiting for the precise moment to act. The Drexery guards outside his cell were oblivious to the subtle beeps coming from a device hidden in his boot. The device was human-made, but its signal was encrypted using Drexery algorithms, a trick Harlan had learned during the war. It was sending bursts of information across subspace, coordinating the movements of a hidden human fleet. The Drexery flagship was the bait, and Harlan had ensured it would dangle long enough to lure his forces into position. When the commander finally descended to the holding area, Harlan looked up with an almost playful smirk. Ah, Commander. I was wondering how long it would take for you to visit me again. Trouble sleeping? The commander scowled. You think your taunts matter now? You're alone, human. Weak, powerless. Your kind's defiance will crumble. Harlan chuckled softly. You talk too much, you know that? Always talking, never listening. That's the problem with your kind. Silence! The commander snarled, slamming his clawed hand against the force field, which flickered in response. You're finished, human. Harlan's smirk widened. Am I? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that forced the commander to lean closer. Do you even know where we are right now? The commander hesitated. What kind of question is that? It's not a question, Harlan replied. It's a warning. At that moment, alarms blared throughout the ship. The lights dimmed, replaced by flashing red alerts. Drexery officers scrambled in confusion, their voices crackling over the intercom system. The commander straightened, his mandibles clicking in agitation. What's happening? He demanded, turning to the nearest officer on the comms. Unidentified fleet dropping out of hyperspace, sir, the officer shouted. Human ships, they've surrounded us. The commander whirled back to Harlan, his claws trembling with rage. What did you do? Me? Harlan shrugged innocently. I'm just an old man. You Drexery did all the hard work for me. Dragged me aboard your flagship, let me poke around your systems, and even gave me time to transmit your location. You should really reconsider your security protocols. The commander's roar of fury echoed through the chamber, but it was drowned out by the sound of distant explosions. The human fleet had begun its assault, their weapons striking the Drexery flagship with pinpoint precision. The ship shuddered under the barrage, and the guards outside Harlan's cell stumbled as the floor tilted beneath them. Harlan stood, the force field around his cell suddenly deactivating. Ah, right on time, he said, stepping out with calm confidence. The guards reached for their weapons, but Harlan moved faster. He grabbed a Drexery plasma rifle from one of the stumbling guards, expertly spinning it in his hands before aiming it at the other. 2 quick bursts of energy dropped them both. The commander backed away, his claws raised. You won't escape this ship alive. Harlan ignored him, accessing the console nearby with practiced ease. Drexery technology wasn't unfamiliar to him. He'd spent years studying it, dismantling it, and turning it against its creators. Within moments, he had disabled the ship's primary targeting systems and triggered false alarms across key decks. Chaos, Harlan muttered to himself as he worked. A soldier's best ally. By now, the Drexery crew was in full panic. Fires raged through the corridors, and secondary explosions rocked the ship as human fighters swarmed it. Harlan activated a comm device he had concealed in his jacket, connecting directly to the human fleet. This is Harlan, he said, his voice calm and commanding. The flagship is compromised. Focus fire on their engines and keep the pressure on their flanks. Leave the bridge intact. I have unfinished business. A voice crackled back over the comm. Copy that, General. Good to hear your voice again. As Harlan moved through the chaos, he encountered more Drexery soldiers. Some tried to fight, but most hesitated, clearly shaken by the realization of who they were up against. Those who resisted didn't last long. Harlan moved like a shadow, precise and unrelenting, every shot finding its mark. Eventually, he reached the bridge. The commander stood there, flanked by a handful of officers who looked far less confident than they had mere hours ago. The ship was falling apart around them, and they knew it. You think you've won? The commander spat as Harlan stepped onto the bridge. Destroy this ship, and another will take its place. You can't stop the Drexery Empire. Harlan tilted his head, a faint smile on his lips. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about stopping your empire. It's about making sure you remember why you lost. The commander lunged at him, claws raised, but Harlan was faster. He sidestepped the attack and delivered a precise strike with the butt of his rifle, sending the Drexery sprawling. Stay down, Harlan said coldly, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. The human fleet's assault intensified, and the flagship groaned as its structural integrity failed. Harlan glanced at the bridge's escape pods, then back at the defeated commander. You never stood a chance, he said simply before turning and stepping into the nearest pod. As the pod launched and the flagship began to collapse in on itself, Harlan watched from the viewport. His mission was complete, and once again, humanity had turned the tide of war. The Drexery flagship erupted in a cascade of fire and debris, its towering hull splitting apart under the relentless assault from the human fleet. Shards of alien alloy drifted into the void, some still glowing from the heat of the battle. Around it, smaller Drexery vessels broke formation, their once proud armada reduced to chaos. Those who could fled into hyperspace, their engines flaring in desperation. The rest were obliterated by the precise, unyielding fire of the human fleet. Aboard the human flagship Resolute, Marcus Harlan stepped off the escape pod and onto the deck. The ship's crew erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the hangar. For them, this was more than a victory. It was a vindication of humanity's strength, a reminder that they could stand against even the most fearsome adversaries. But Harlan's expression remained stoic, his eyes scanning the jubilant faces with a quiet intensity. General Harlan! A young officer greeted him, saluting sharply. The fleet reports minimal casualties. The Drexery forces are retreating. Harlan nodded, his voice calm but firm. Good. Ensure we have patrols ready in case they regroup. And sweep for survivors. No loose ends. The officer hesitated, clearly expecting more. Perhaps a speech, some acknowledgement of their triumph. But Harlan simply walked past him, his boots echoing against the metallic floor as he headed toward the observation deck. The weight of the battle, and its implications, hung heavy on his shoulders. From the viewport, Harlan watched as the remnants of the Drexery fleet vanished into the blackness of space. For a moment, he allowed himself to reflect. The Drexery had underestimated humanity, as so many others had before them. They had seen only a species divided by politics and petty conflicts, too young and scattered to pose a real threat. But they hadn't understood what desperation could forge. On the bridge of a surviving Drexery cruiser, Commander Vrex sat slumped in his chair, his claws clutching the armrests. The reports from the battle played on a loop in his mind, the human fleet's sudden appearance, their brutal precision, the overwhelming firepower. He had watched the flagship fall, its destruction a symbol of his people's hubris. This was no ordinary human, Vrex muttered, his voice a mix of awe and dread. Around him, the remaining officers avoided his gaze, their pride shattered. We captured a frail old man. A relic. Yet he turned our might into ash. One of his officers spoke up hesitantly. What should we tell the High Council? Vrex's mandibles clicked together in frustration, but his tone softened. Tell them we've awakened something we cannot control. Tell them the humans are not prey, they are predators who hide their claws until it's too late. As the Drexery's ship disappeared into the ether, Harlan's thoughts drifted back to humanity's past. They were not the strongest species, nor the most advanced. But they were the most relentless. Every time they were cornered, beaten down, or pushed to the brink, they had found a way to survive. That adaptability was their greatest strength, born from centuries of struggling against forces far greater than themselves. He remembered the cost of that strength, the lives lost, the sacrifices made. Faces of fallen comrades flashed through his mind, each one a silent reminder of the price of victory. Harlan's methods had always been controversial, even among his own people. He had been called ruthless, inhuman, a monster. Yet he bore those labels willingly because he knew what was at stake. Survival was never clean or easy. It demanded hard choices, sacrifices, and a willingness to bear the burden of those choices. The door to the observation deck slid open, and Admiral Taryn entered, her uniform immaculate despite the chaos of battle. She approached Harlan, her tone respectful but firm. General, the fleet is regrouping. We'll be heading back to Seoul shortly. Harlan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars. Good. But this isn't over. No, Taryn agreed. But today, we reminded them what humanity is capable of. Did we? Harlan asked, his tone more contemplative than triumphant. Or did we simply show them the lengths we're willing to go? Taryn frowned but didn't press the issue. She had served with Harlan long enough to know that his victories always came with a shadow of doubt. Either way, General, you've given us hope. That's more than most can say. Harlan didn't respond immediately. He simply watched as the distant Drexery wreckage drifted into the void, the remnants of a battle that would be etched into history. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. Hope is dangerous. It can blind you. Make you complacent. Taryn sighed. And yet, without it, we'd have nothing. As she left, Harlan stood alone, his thoughts turning inward. The Drexery had learned their lesson today, but he knew it wouldn't be the last time humanity would face such a challenge. The galaxy was vast, and its dangers were endless. But so, too, was humanity's will to endure. He whispered to himself, the words carrying both determination and warning. The war isn't over, but neither are we. And with that, he turned away from the stars, ready to face whatever came next.